Hello and welcome to the Nature Disturbed podcast, a podcast where we look at the good, the offensive and the confusing parts of the animal kingdom and beyond. Is that my tagline? It could be. Here's another one I've been workshopping. Welcome to the Nature Disturbed podcast. A podcast where I sit on my cheese grater and splash around. Now that I say it out loud, I definitely prefer the second one, but it is unclear. I'm pleased to say that the stars have aligned. Researchers have responded to my endless spam, begging them for their expertise. That means that we're running to a theme, wet and wild, if you haven't heard. So, this series will look exclusively at relationships between life and water. Once again, I'm sat here in my kitchen sink wearing a bikini. To get into the spirit of today's episode, I'm also wearing a Florida Gators baseball cap. It's a green alligator against a blue and orange background. I'm not sure which sport they're affiliated with. Netball, perhaps. Or hockey. This podcast was recorded on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to elders past and present. This episode contains strong language and adult themes. Today, we will be investigating the subterranean world of sewers and searching for life inside them. Specifically, I'll be exploring the urban legend that these underground waterways are home to alligators. Snap, snap. So contemporary folklore would have it, cities like New York, Chicago, and Paris have populations of giant gators living beneath the streets. Today, I'll be asking questions like, is there any truth behind these legends? Why are alligators so resilient? And why won't my psychologist believe me about the fairies on my shoulders and the things they tell me? There is a thrill I get from thinking about the murky, sewery underworld beneath our feet. To my mind, it's like a parallel universe. I get the same feeling when I think about the London Underground at night. An entire city devoid of human life underneath another city. What goes on down there? Here's a quote from Stephen King's It. Although it's about a killer clown, imagine he's referring to an alligator. The voices in the drains weren't voices at all. They were living things, slithering just out of sight, just out of reach. You could almost believe they were trying to coax you down. Let's define some terms. An urban area is an area of human settlement characterized by a high population density and an environment of built infrastructure, including roads, buildings, and utilities. We can define urban wildlife as the animals that are able to tolerate or even thrive in those environments. Some urban species have evolved alongside humans to become completely dependent on human structures, those such as house mice and bedbugs. These species are known as synanthropic, and they're able to exist well outside their natural range thanks to human settlement. Our final definition is sounding, which is when a metal rod is inserted into a person's Ouch! It's actually completely unrelated to today's episode, so please forget that I ever mentioned it, and definitely don't Google it. We live in an increasingly urban world. In 1950, 700 million people, around 30% of the world's population, lived in urban areas. Now, more than half of the global population inhabit urban areas. That's over 4.5 billion of us. With that many people living in urban environments, it would seem that there can't possibly be any space for wildlife. But there is. I've seen it with my own eyes. Parades of rats dancing through the street at night, flocks of pigeons staring down from building tops as I coyly mince through an alleyway. Cities are mazes of cables and skyscrapers, full of opportunity. For all their flaws, they are remarkable places. I love cities, they're great. Well, not all of them. Adelaide is boring. We hear a lot of doom and gloom when it comes to the relationship between humans and other animals, and frankly, that's because there is a lot of doom and gloom. For all their wonder, cities take up space, they guzzle resources, and they forcibly evict native species. But some of the creatures with whom we share our planet have managed to hack the system. And not just rats and pigeons. It may surprise you to know that there are leopards in Mumbai, saltwater crocodiles in Darwin, and mountain lions in Los Angeles. It surprised me, but that's because I'm riddled with anxiety, and I exist in a constant state of surprise. What was that? I think it was just a leaf outside. Okay, I have to go and check that all of my doors are locked a few times, so now seems like a good time to report back to my past self. For your information, I took a trip to Florida to investigate the plumbing and to catch up with ecologist Alan Ivory to see what he knows about the inhabitants of the Floridian sewer system. Lovely. I've arrived here in north central Florida in the city of Gainesville, home to 150,000 people. It's, moist. I have to meet Alan Ivory in half an hour on the other side of Gainesville, but there's a match today. Florida Gators are doing, netball, I suppose. I know if I head into town, I won't be able to move an inch. I don't think I'll make it in time. I can't go through it. Can't go around it. Can't go over it. I can't fly, though that's not for lack of trying. I'm left with one option. Luckily, I looked at a map of Gainesville sewer systems before I left for Florida, so I think I can sniff out a route that will get me to Alan Ivory in time. It's hard not to say both of his names. If I'm not mistaken, I just need to carefully step down this bank. Oh! Ugh. Rancid vegetation. Get off me. Well, would you look at that? In front of me is the entrance to what could be hell. It's a grey tunnel, 3 metres in height, with a small stream of water running out of its entrance. It's a bit grimy, and I can't see further than a couple of metres. Hello? Who is it? You're a sexy mama. Why, thank you. I can't resist a compliment. Let's go inside. I packed a little bag of things I thought might be helpful for a sewer expedition. I brought my Tamagotchi. Obviously would have been wrong for me to leave that at home to starve. And that's it. I'm starting to wish I'd brought a torch and maybe some pepper spray. That feels very American, doesn't it? Pepper spray. And it could come in handy. I have reason to believe that there are alligators in this sewer system. And given that we're in the throes of a biodiversity crisis and global ecological collapse, I'm left wondering, how is it that a 6-metre-long, half-ton apex predator is able to survive at the heart of human settlement? Well, alligators, like all crocodilians, are masters of just that. Survival. They have lived for hundreds of millions of years and weathered multiple mass extinction events, including the one which brought an end to the reign of the non-avian dinosaurs. The non-avian dinosaurs just means all dinosaurs that aren't birds. Alligators are poikilotherms, meaning they rely on external sources to maintain their internal body temperature, such as basking in the sun or panting like a dog when they get too hot. Sounds like they need external validation, but clearly it's working for them. As such, they're able to withstand great variation in internal temperature. They aren't like us endothermic mammals, who have to eat a lot in order to maintain a constant internal environment. Goodness knows, being just 1 degree too hot is cause for concern in humans. That means alligators can go for very long periods without eating. You can see how that may have come in handy 66 million years ago, when the sky was dark for a year, and 75% of all life vanished. Alligators have some other tricks up their sleeve. Do alligators have sleeves? For instance, their blood contains powerful antioxidants, which allows them to heal from major trauma. I wish I could heal from major trauma. They can slow down their metabolisms, allowing them to endure icy conditions, a process known as brimation. A varied diet, too, builds resilience, and they can take prey ranging from small fish to large mammals. They have a thick skin, too. I wish I had a thick skin. Focus. There are alligators afoot. The good news is, I'll know if I'm approaching one because they're territorial and they make this deep, awful bellowing noise when someone's entering their territory. Is it midnight tonight? God, that's annoying. I'll just go around this way instead. Where was I? It's worth mentioning that, although alligators have managed to hold on, their future wasn't always so clear. As determined as they are to survive, humans can be just as determined to wipe species off the face of the earth, and in the late 1800s to mid-1900s, alligators were threatened by poaching. They're still threatened by encroachment of their habitat, which is why it's important that we understand how they use human environments and how we can share them in the future in a way that works for both us and them. I see a future in which humans and alligators can live together peacefully, a future in which alligators have the right to vote and they are allowed to adopt human children, a future in which humans are allowed to crawl naked through sewers, eating raw fish without fear of prejudice or persecution. I'm getting carried away. Perfect timing. If I'm not mistaken, that little crack of light up ahead is a manhole. That's where I should be heading. It won't be the first time I followed a crack to get to a manhole. It should lead to Alan. He's going to tell me about the sewers and the life to be found in them. The reason he has a clue is because he's placed cameras down here. I wonder how he put them here. And he recorded everything. Does that mean he's been watching me? Great. I think I've arrived at my destination. It's bright. Alan, hello. As you know, I've just crawled through an extensive sewer system to meet you. Very fortunate to have come up the right hole. I don't know how I did that. I didn't have a map down there, but here we are. Thanks for meeting me.
Nice to meet you as well. It sounds like you are kind of following the path of a lot of the animals that I saw. They don't have a map of these sewer systems, yet they come at the right spot. They come up the right manholes.
Incredible that in inbuilt navigation system. The one down there was a freshwater surface runoff system, as I understand, rather than a sanitary system.
That's correct, yeah. Whenever people hear about sewer systems, they oftentimes think of sanitary sewer. Where does my bathroom water go? And well, that is a system in lots of places, including here in the southeastern United States. In our area, we have sanitary sewers that are separate from our stormwater sewers. So stormwater sewers just in rainwater from pavement, concrete, houses, and it drains into a stormwater pipe, eventually into a pond, which is completely separate, at least in our area, from sanitary sewer. Other parts of the world, they combine those things. But for the sake of your journey, you were interacting with lots of water, maybe, and maybe some leaves.
Yeah, I do. I also saw an alligator, which was it was alarming, but thankfully made it out alive. So the area that we're in now is Gainesville, Florida. Where is that on a map?
Sure, Gainesville, Florida is in north central Florida, so that's the southeastern United States, but we're in the northern part of Florida. The environment, whenever you think of Florida, you might think of like the Everglades, which is the swampy wetland. You may even call it like an estuary where it's salt and fresh water all mixing. That's not the case where we're at in Gainesville, Florida. Gainesville is the center of the state, a bit higher in elevation, so it's not as Everglades-like. That being said, we do get these seasonal floods. So an area close to where we were studying is called Payne's Prairie, where it's tall grass and some shrubs and whatnot that'll seasonally have some standing water and then it'll dry out through other parts of the year. And our sewer systems are not much different than this. They would hold water after large rain events and then they would dry out as they eventually drain out into a pond.
So in Gainesville, how extensive is that system?
There are kilometers and kilometers of pipe underground that moves water, and they can all be interconnected. And one network of pipe can range across town in some regard. An animal can access a dozen or so different lakes, all within the same sewer network. whenever one area is overflowing with water, the water can flow to a different area just using gravity-fed water supplies and whatnot. But it seems as though animals also took advantage of this immense network of pipes below ground.
So what I'm imagining, a lot of different pipes of varying sizes, maybe standing bodies of water as well.
Let's
I
do a
don't-
nice little journey here.
Yeah, I'd love
Um,
that.
we'll go from a pond, and you'll see that there's a decent sized pipe at this pond, typically concrete or metal or something like that. In some cases, they're large enough that we can even walk through, although that's not normally the case. You get a few meters in, maybe we'll say 50 meters in or so, and you'll see that you'll have a split. Yeah, it almost is like these little fingerlings of pipes below ground. You have this large one, and then it gets smaller and smaller until you eventually have created this really immense network, this really interconnected network of these smaller pipes that drain into that bigger pipe, all from curved inlets with manholes or from grates.
Okay, so it's an underground labyrinth
It's a
with varying
labyrinth. That's a
levels of
great
water,
term to use. Yeah.
right? And I suppose sometimes of the year, do they meet their capacity?
So I had 40 or so cameras, and that was because aside from raccoons stealing and breaking some of my cameras, we also had some flooding that did occur. And so in north central Florida in the June months, that's the start of our hurricane season. So these hurricanes can bring in half a meter of rain, would not be unsurprising, if not more sometimes.
God.
Um, and so during those times, absolutely, those sewers kind of hit that capacity, and then you get the flooding above ground. But majority of the time, these pipes were pretty bone dry. I would accidentally drop a camera and I would just crawl through the pipe and grab it. And it was, for the most part, a dry system, aside from those sporadic events.
What, so you've been crawling down there yourself?
Yes, not typically on purpose, but yes, I've been in there and traversed the systems.
Okay, so you've got first-hand experience of these, so as now is probably a good time to ask you what was the research.
Absolutely. So my previous boss, Steve Johnson at the University of Florida, he had noted otter kind of like sitting at the entry of a stormwater pipe that was entering this pond. And so we kind of sparked an idea back and forth where we would place what's called a game camera or a trail camera, which are effectively these motion sensor cameras that only turn on whenever something moves in front of it.
So it all began with an otter.
It all began with an otter on a university campus. There's a couple different things that the research entails, but I'll focus on the one that's been published thus far for now. We would mount these cameras underneath the manholes and grates, and we would record basically 10-second videos every time an animal, hopefully, fingers crossed there, would walk by. These cameras use both the motion and also temperature differences. If I get a paw here and a tail there, I can piece together what the animal was. So that's part one of the video. But part two of the video is what are they doing? Which wasn't an intention going in per se, I guess. But we would record mother raccoons nursing their young or opossums carrying their young on their back. Or in the case of the alligators, we would see them cornering fish in some of these culverts, another name for certain types of these sewer pipes, and they would eat the fish that they've cornered. So these videos ended up being really important for what were these animals doing. As for the rest of the study, it effectively was just being selective about where you put these pipes to get a range of conditions. So we tried some pipes that were 2, 3 meters tall. We tried some that were barely big enough for my camera to fit inside while still being able to see in front of it. And kind of the gamut of things in between how much urbanization was above ground versus being put in a forest, all of those sorts of things, which will feed into the next parts of this research.
Okay, so you were trying to build a picture of what's happening underneath your very feet.
Exactly. Where are they choosing to go? What are they doing while they're down there? What species of animal are preferring certain types of systems over another?
I thought I would ask you what you were expecting to find down in the sewers in relation to what you were surprised by.
So to answer this properly, I need to address a previous thing. I mentioned how these cameras used motion and temperature, but never explained why that was important. Why that's important is because I expected to see lots of amphibians, so things like frogs. I expected to see a lot more reptiles, so things like snakes and lizards. I expected to see rats and all those sorts of things. So those are the things I thought going into this. But then if you think about how these cameras work, and they use motion, yes, but they also use temperature. Reptiles and amphibians are cold-blooded species. So their temperature might not be as different from the world around them as I would have expected or that the camera would like to expect. And so we only had a handful of non-alligator reptiles, and the amphibians we saw were rather limited or a byproduct of the bats flying up above, and I would see the frogs down below. And so going into it, I expected a lot more of that side of things, these reptiles, amphibians, and rats. And well, I did get quite a few rats, and that was for a very particular system that we had like 300, 400 rats were within one sewer pipe, and it was like a one-off type of thing in some regards. That's what I was expecting.
I'm not surprised that you were expecting to find rats. What were they doing? What was it about that
Sure.
little area that they had taken a liking to?
It was unique in that it was one of the most shallow pipes that I was in. So effectively, from if the camera was to fall, it was my elbow length. So I'm not confirming, I don't know what distance that is, but it was very shallow. It was one of my more shallow spots. It was in this one unique spot that had a very thick litter bed. There was lots of leaves that were just sitting there, which made a nice home for these rats. Interestingly enough, some non-scientific things kind of became the end of that spot, in that we had a firearm that was on camera in that spot. So as some water washed away some of the leaves, a handgun was exposed, and thus I stopped visiting that site. So I was very interested in what other small animals we might see there, but yeah, non-scientific things became the end of that study site.
Wow, I hope this isn't offensive, but that's how I imagine Florida.
It's a fair assumption. Yeah, a fair assumption, and I'm glad it was taken care of.
Yeah, yeah, good job getting out of that one.
Yeah, it was actually rather funny that a cat, like a house cat, was the one who exposed the firearm. So it's kind of this very interesting, like humans have cats, humans have firearms, and yet the cats who exposed the firearm, I don't know. I thought it was unique Florida human thing.
The cat exposed the firearm. What does that mean?
As in, like the cat was like digging through the leaves. It was rainy, and so like between the water and the cat digging, the firearm kind of exposed just as the cat was digging.
Wow, literally then. Okay, so Detective Kitty there solving
And
crimes.
kitty.
And the other very Florida thing that inhabits the sewers is, of course, the alligator. I love alligators. I find the fact that they exist in the 21st century amazing. They're one of those animals that live
Prehistoric in
yeah.
some ways, right? Yeah.
What kind of size are they growing to?
Any alligator size we saw in the sewer. That's pretty much what I can say. So we had things as small as sub-meter up to 4 meter-ish, I would say. So the 13, 14 feet, I believe we had some examples of. Majority of the time where we would see these alligators were in those flooded pipes that I was talking about. So while most of the pipes were dry through the majority of our study period, there was a handful of these pipes that remained wet the entire time. There's a highway that goes through that Payne's Prairie I was telling about earlier, this semi-annual flooding place. And that was the spot that we would have the most alligators going right on through. I don't even know how large the pipe is per se, because it just was always flooded, and it just goes from one side of the road to the other, connecting two lakes. So it's a very short sewer system, again, sub 50 meters, but it was traversed rather often by these alligators. Um, it was actually on a rare occurrence that we'd actually see alligators not swimming. I can think of maybe a handful of cases, sub 5 times, of an alligator actually walking through the sewer pipe. It was almost exclusively in these areas that were flooded for the majority of the study, which I thought was rather unique. If they chose the path of least resistance, the other way of getting to this lake would have been crossing a road on foot. So they chose the option that was the water, the less energy way. And so I thought it was like a very methodical thing of decision I was making.
How are they making that kind of decision? Is it a process of trial and error? Do they explore all of the pipes before building a network in their brain, or is it using smell?
In the case of the alligator in this specific system, it's such a short pipe that you're able to see right on through. And so it very well just could be that they're just following the water from one place to the next and not even really thinking that I'm inside a pipe. The ones I think are maybe more interesting, there's another system where it's a creek, a rather small creek that goes, a pipe goes underneath a bike path, and it ends up at what you'd call, it's called a box culvert. So the one technical term I'll throw out is a box culvert. And essentially all this is a grate from above with a essentially a concrete box below that only has one pipe that empties back out to this creek. And so what it was meant for is that as water from the bike path or water from the roadside next to it kind of goes to this low spot and it goes into this grate, and the water from this grate would empty back out into that creek. But the reverse can also be true, that this alligator would crawl back through the pipe from the creek to this box culvert with only one way out being the way that he came in. And he would corral fish into this culvert and then feed upon all of them once he's trapped them there. His body is blocking the hole, and so he would just pick off the litter of whatever fish were there. In that case, it may be accidental, but that seemed very methodical, and that maybe is an adaptation that's occurring in this alligator's lifetime. And so in the past 40, 50 years, this alligator may have realized, wow, if I go down this path, they have no way out. It may be decision making, it may be accidental, but some of these things just seem too coincidental to be accidental.
Yeah, and they must be doing something right to have survived however many extinction events it is and still be here. So they're not just transient, they're living full alligator lives down in these sewers, feeding.
Yeah, and if we expand this beyond just the alligators to other animals making decisions. And one particular system, because I didn't want to actually trap any raccoons and put a tracker on them, instead I put a camera at the entrance from the pond into the sewer system, and then at every single manhole within that system. So about maybe 20 or so cameras. And I would time, all right, if the raccoon passed by this first camera at the pond at, we'll say, midnight, and then at 12:15, it was at this camera. I can make some assumptions about how long they're down there. It very well could be multiple raccoons, but I can make some assumptions about how long they were down there. And in that case, I mean, we would see 5, 6, 7+ hours. In some cases, it might be 24 hours that this raccoon has spent underground exploring all of the paths, or at least they would highlight certain paths. And so where I was going with this is that there was certain fingers of this stormwater network that we never saw a raccoon or any animal for that matter, and then other ones that would be every single day, 10 times a day that we'd see a raccoon. And so, while it could be that they're just exploring all their options, it does seem that they have a mindset going into this. If I'm going to go to X, Y, and Z place, it would be very interesting that we would have the raccoon enter from the pond, go 3 stops, make a left, go 2 more stops, and then climb the ladder out of the sewer pipe and come out the curb. And lo and behold, it would be a city park where there was no more roads. It was just a green area that they could harvest or hunt. It very much seemed like a very methodical decision-making process of finding food, staying off the roads, not be hit by cars. I mentioned in the very beginning that these cameras are mounted via a magnet. At least most of them were mounted via a magnet. And so if you apply any exorbitant amount of force to the cameras, you can pull them off. In the case of the very shallow pipes, we would sometimes have raccoons just like standing up on their behind 2 legs and grabbing the camera, pulling it down, and they would take off a few meters away, and I'd find my camera again. These raccoons would pull at the cameras, turn them all about, angle them at the ground, and so I'd have to visit these cameras rather often, more often than I likely would had to have previously, just to set these cameras back up how they need to be to work properly. But yes, the raccoons would take advantage of them.
Was it just to terrorize you, perhaps? Or did they
They
have
don't
some?
know that I'm there per se, but I use infrared cameras. For the most part, they're not seeing the infrared. They might see a small glow from those lights, but they do likely see that the recording light being slightly red. They're interested in what this flashing light is. Aside from that, you have a rather smooth surface within the sewer pipe, or a tree is rather a smooth surface. And now you see that there's this thing that jets out. I imagine that just might be an interesting thing. If they're in tune with their environment, they might notice that this thing is not normal.
They're curious, aren't they?
Very curious creatures. Yeah.
So the bats down there, I imagine they were roosting, and
Correct.
you've got to be careful if you're a roosting bat where you pick. You don't want to be in the flood water, I suppose.
You are reading my mind. Yes. So at first glance, seeing bats in the sewer system was something that I was so happy for. I was ecstatic because in these urban areas, we're trying to build these artificial roofs, so bat houses or just things we'll put on the outside of our buildings to promote bats living in cities. I mean, they have a lot of benefits to bats being in cities. And so the fact that we would have hundreds, if not thousands of bats roosting into these sewer pipes, I thought was a great thing, and that we're providing effectively a free space for them to live. We didn't have to construct a new building for these bats to live in. It sounds like a great thing off the bat, and I still stand by it. It probably is a really great thing. But during those hurricane seasons, I have some concerns that the bats would end up being trapped in this pipe and not have a way out. There's some other scenarios where stormwater agencies, like managers, will flood the pipes to clear out any debris. So there's a couple different concerns about bats being stuck in the sewers, but again, they're overall maybe a net good that they can have a place to live.
You mentioned that there are some benefits to having bats to people. Oh, two things. One is, what are those benefits? And the other being, did you realize that you used the expression off the bat just then? Was that on purpose?
That was not on purpose. I think that's maybe my baseball background kind of coming in. As for the other part, what was that again?
Well, that was the most important question, so thank you for clearing that up. What are the benefits of bats to
Oh,
humans?
bat. So things like diseases that mosquitoes carry or other insects might carry, these bats can take care of those. But malaria and other mosquito-borne diseases are concerns.
Totally wouldn't have thought of that. Is there any evidence that there are many animals using the sanitation sewer
Ooh.
systems?
Australia is known for their snakes that have come up drains. And at least in my area of expertise, it's not uncommon to have heard of stories of frogs and snakes coming back up the sanitary sewer and getting up in the toilet. That does exist. Even in Florida, we'll have frogs that will climb into our pipes and work their way up into the toilet. A septic system can be open, can have cracks and be open to the outside world. And so it's not unlikely for it to happen where an animal works its way through those pipes and get back into the toilet, kind of the common example. But it's also not unlikely for the reverse to happen. An animal from inside your house goes into the pipe as well. And I think that's also probably pretty likely. In Florida, we'll have Cuban tree frogs, an invasive frog here, that will already be in your house and just so happen to go to a toilet as well. I'm sure it goes both ways.
Right. Well, I'll be peeing against the tree in my garden tonight. It's always better to
Just
be
be
cautious.
mindful,
Yeah,
mindful.
yeah, mindful peeing. Yeah, you're right. I'll use my neighbor's tree instead. It sounds like the populations of animals, including alligators, that are in the sewers aren't particularly isolated. In fact, they're like a huge part of the connectivity. So I love the idea of maybe waiting a few hundred or thousand years, millions of years perhaps, to see some sort of genetic mutation take place.
Okay.
I should say I think I know the answer to this, but I'm hoping that I'm wrong. Please tell
I
me
can
that,
entertain this. Yeah,
yes, entertain. Yes, thank you.
yeah. So the first thing that comes to mind is it's not uncommon for cave-dwelling species to end up losing eyesight. And so there's, I want to say it's like blind salamanders and like other like shrimp-like animals that live their entire lives in caves. They have no need for eyes, so just through evolutionary time, they lose their eyesight. And so I could see something like that happening, although with our current understanding of sewer animals, they intermingle with the outside world. I could see opposable thumbs being a useful thing, or more useful thing in these sewer systems. So, for example, we would have raccoons climbing in and out via these ladders. I could imagine other animals also taking advantage of it. So, opossums are known for their climbing ability, at least on trees and whatnot. So maybe, well, we never documented it. I could see them climbing in these sewer systems a bit more often. Even within our own lifetime, something I'd like to point out is this one I know is in Poland. These old World War II bunkers have been infested with what they consider invasive raccoons. Although they're native to my area, they're not. It was 96% is the number I believe from the paper of the raccoons that they sampled from this World War II bunker had bats in their feces. And so that's within our lifetime, I mean, a little bit longer than my lifetime, that we've seen raccoons take advantage of this new food source within stormwater systems. previous to these cave systems, I would imagine it was not too common for a raccoon to interact with a bat. Those are two distinct populations of species. They don't interact very often, I would imagine. It'd probably be a bat falls out of its tree, and thus the raccoon has an opportunity to eat it. And so the fact that these raccoons are climbing these ladders in these sewer systems, that puts them now within a handful of reach, a close reach to these bats. And so I can imagine new foraging opportunities arising with time between bats, raccoons, or other interactions taking place. In the case of some bats, a behavior that you typically don't see in the wild as often is something that I believe the term is called gleaning. And effectively, it's that bats typically will fly around and eat their food. They'll catch the insects in the air, or they'll land on a tree possibly and eat some insects. But gleaning is kind of this idea of bats landing on the ground and eating insects off of the ground. And in the wild, you can see this being problematic in that predators can be on the ground. But in these sewer systems, their predators may not be there. And so we're seeing these new behaviors, or at least less common behaviors, taking place more often in the sewer systems. They can land on the bottom of these sewer pipes and eat the cockroaches that are crawling around without any fear of a predator finding them. This is a new, or at least less common foraging behavior that occurs within sewer systems. The alligator's only new behavior that may increase their survivability is likely that trapping of their food source in a certain location. This is not uncommon, I would say. There's other areas of Florida that whenever the water level is fluctuating, alligators will kind of line up side by side and will trap animals trying to get from one side of the road to the other. And so there's these animals called amphiomas. It's an amphibian that is a water-loving type species, and these alligators are kind of eat them and they harvest them in high numbers as they go from one side of the road to the other. And so this has been documented for 20 odd years. I'll expand it a little bit even to raccoons. We would have raccoons that would wait for a sewer pipe to drain down, and they would enter that pipe, and all of these aquatic life that didn't make their way back with the water, so things like snails and crawfish, would be trapped in these culverts and have no way of protecting themselves per se. They're in a concrete box, and the raccoons would then eat the crawfish and eat those snails. All sorts of animals would find these new ways of surviving, or at least unique ways of surviving.
So I suppose that the way you could look at the sewers and their use by animals in a bigger picture would be to help travel. How could we incorporate this sort of knowledge into urban planning in general for cities and sewer systems that have yet to be built?
Something I wish I could have studied would have been the roadkill side of things. Maybe in areas that we have increased underground culverts or some sort of sewer corridor, we could have less roadkill. That would be a great avenue to explore of are they taking advantage of these pipes to be preventing being hit by cars. And so if we could prevent that, that could actually be an economic benefit to humans and also a lively benefit to these animals. And so yeah, I have to think about promoting this from an economic standpoint as well. I'll provide one more example for why it's beneficial for animals. There's a term called genetic connectivity, and it's effectively that you can isolate a population of animals and then they just start interbreeding with those, and they might be getting too interbred in some regards. And so if you can connect populations together, then that population is more diverse in its genetics, no longer associated siblings having relations. So that's another benefit, especially whenever it comes to animals that were in concern of like extinction and those sorts of things. So the Florida panther, for example, if you can increase the connectivity of our panthers, then that's more genetics being spread. As for taking this into consideration with urban planning, part of it is with our existing infrastructure, so our existing pipes that we already have, we can be considered about when we flush out our systems. So going back to the bat example, if we flush them out and we know bats are inside, that may be problematic. You can kill off hundreds of bats at one time. I would sometimes open up my manholes, and around my cameras would be dozens, if not multiple dozens, of bats. And so if that system was to have been flooded, we could have lost like a decent population, not just on one manhole. You think about the entire network, hundreds of bats at one time could be flushed out and possibly cause a mortality event. As for in building new construction, a couple of different things here. We noticed that in some areas, large rain events or debris being washed down the drain would cause frogs and snakes to be knocked into the pipe. They don't typically go down there per se. And so we would have a snake or frogs just sit at one spot for longer than 24 hours. They would have no idea where they are. Their only ways out are either A, climbing back out the curb that they came into, and depending on the size of this animal, they maybe couldn't get back out, or B, they then find a way out of the pipe to the nearest pond. If they're a non-aquatic species, maybe that's a problem because if you're a terrestrial snake that can't swim or doesn't or not exposed to that very often, that can be problematic. I kind of proposed in that paper in Urban Naturalist that maybe we provide some sort of ramping or stair system out that can aid in the movement of these animals out. Outside of that, stormwater systems can be a way of mitigating erosion. So basically, we have too much water coming out of these pipes, and it can wash away the ground outside of these pipes. And what this can cause is now it'll be a drop off. Once you leave the pipe, all of that land has been washed away, and now it might be impossible for an animal to get back in. And so, kind of designing the exit of these pipes in a way that can prevent erosion, which is just beneficial to preserving natural areas in general, but also can be a way for the animals to get in and out in the long term. Beyond that, just as long as you provide a way for these animals to get in and out without having to interact with the road, is always going to be a beneficial thing as far as I'm concerned. The paper that has currently came out simply is just documenting what species we saw in the sewer system and what they're doing. So both documenting occurrence and then behavior. The paper that fingers crossed will come out in the next month or so, a couple months now, will be looking at just the raccoons and the bats and what makes them choose one sewer system over another. In the coming months, I very well may start another research project related to these species with the same data called multi-species occupancy. And what this means is that I will look at other species outside of the bats and raccoons and kind of leverage the information that we know about them to make some guesses about what systems the other species liked. For example, our armadillos and our possums very well may act like raccoons and maybe we'll see nothing different, but it very well may be that they even have their own unique niches that they like. And so I might combine their smaller data sets together to kind of make grouped occupancy. Armadillos and possums really don't like traffic noise, and so they're going to prefer a sewer system that has lots of interconnected pipes that they can stay further away from the noise. Or maybe in the case of birds. The birds would make their nests in these unique systems. And so maybe these nests are going to be only in areas where there's a grate so they can have sunlight. And the grates provide these little web of holes that they can bring their resources in. And that's what the future research of this might look like. And then I also mentioned previously looking at roadkill, for example. And so there's lots of fruitful avenues of future research that this might provoke interesting thoughts in.
Well, I'm glad that it doesn't end there and that you're going to carry on with it because it is fascinating. And it's the future, isn't it? You know, we're not going to stop urbanizing anytime soon. I don't imagine. So it's good to have an idea of how we might be able to coexist.
Yeah, there's a theory of ecology called novel ecosystems. And it's effectively, we can't return ecosystems to what they previously were. I mean, we can try, and like that's the whole thing behind, I do invasive species work now. And that's a lot of the ideas behind it is returning it to what it should be. But in some cases, like in urban areas, we can't bring back what the ecosystem was. And even if we could, we probably wouldn't because like that's where we also live. And so this idea of finding this novel ecosystem that kind of gives us all the best attributes for these animals while also being beneficial to us humans. There's probably some interconnectedness, or we can find this happy medium that I'm just happy to be a part of. I'm happy to provide inspiration for future scientists and to delve more into this myself as well.
Alan, I think I might have forgotten to put my bins out and it's bin night tomorrow, so I'm gonna crawl back into this sewer
All
and
right.
wish me luck getting out of it again. Uh,
Absolutely. Follow the raccoons on the way out.
I'll say hi from you and
Mm.
I'll see if they have any explanation for all of that camera mischief.
Yeah, I'd like to get them back. So yeah, if you don't mind doing that for me, I'd appreciate it.
Wasn't Alan fantastic? I look forward to spending the rest of the week urinating against my neighbour's tree. Thankfully, we don't really talk, so it's unlikely that he's listening to this podcast. He's lovely though, for the record, very nice, but that won't stop me from pissing in his garden. Thank you, Alan, for providing valuable insight which we'll need if we want a future that's not completely devoid of wildlife. Thank you, Damon Macmillan, for the music, and thank you for listening. As I did last time, I thought I would give a short poem. This one is called The Dietary Preferences of an American Alligator. In the swamps and lakes and sewers throughout northern central Florida, to a yearling fish it must be true that there is nothing horrider than an empty-bellied alligator who is setting out to hunt. A stillness falls across the water, no chirp nor squeak nor grunt. For panthers, bears and pythons flee that horrid silent sound. Even they are on the menu when the gators are around. The gator starts with a fish, perhaps, a nice Irish pompano. He'll scare the croaking gourami, who'll start croaking in soprano. The ladyfish and suckermouth will all begin to lurch, followed by the black acara, white mullet and perch. Once he's had his fish course, there'll be internal discourse. Should I eat another creature, perhaps a turtle with sauce? Now, the natural curve of a turtle's back protects it from an unwanted attack. At least in theory, the turtle slides out the mouth when a bite collides with the carapace, round and tricky to clasp in jaws, but things get sticky when the gator does decide on getting through that bony hide. As the gator applies the bite force, all 1,300 kilos might force the shell to pop, and out he'll scoop a lovely meal of turtle soup. A white-tailed deer like you or I just can't go without water, and so they'll have to shimmy up to ponds they know they ought to avoid at risk of life or limb, or cute white fluffy tail. But as they drink all doughy-eyed, a nearby floating log sets sail. Now floating logs eat feral hogs, and feral cats, and feral dogs, so floating logs would surely find the prospect quite appealing, to take a bite out of a doe and leave the others reeling. In the swamps and lakes and sewers of northern central Florida, to any creature wanting life, it's true there's nothing horrider.